Drop everything. Right now. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're watching, whatever you thought your plans were for the next few days, stop. Because there is a storm system developing in the Atlantic that has the meteorological community on edge in a way that I have not seen in a very long time. And if you are anywhere along the Gulf Coast, the eastern seaboard, the Caribbean, or even deep inland across the southeast and mid-Atlantic, what I am about to tell you could be the most important weather information you receive this season. A large, powerful, and rapidly organizing tropical system is coming. And the word coming is doing a lot of work in that sentence because the question right now is not whether this storm is going to impact the United States. The question is how strong it is going to be when it does, which coastline it hits hardest, and how many millions of people are sitting directly in a path that the models are drawing more clearly and more consistently with every single forecast cycle that passes. The atmosphere has been building toward this for weeks. The ocean temperatures that this system is feeding off are running well above normal for this time of year. The steering currents that will guide its track are locked in a way that gives forecasters very little wiggle room on the general threat corridor. And the National Hurricane Center, which does not use alarming language casually, is already using language that should make every coastal resident from Texas to Maine sit up straight and pay attention. Let me give you the atmospheric context first, because this storm does not exist in a vacuum and you cannot understand how dangerous it is without understanding the environment it is moving through. Sea surface temperatures across the Gulf of Mexico and the western Atlantic are running between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius above the seasonal average across vast stretches of the basin right now. That does not sound like a lot. It sounds like a rounding error. But in the world of tropical meteorology, that difference is enormous. Warm ocean water is the fuel that powers hurricanes. It is the engine. It is what takes a disorganized cluster of thunderstorms rotating around a low pressure center and transforms it into a structured, organized, powerful tropical cyclone with a defined eye, an eye wall capable of producing catastrophic winds, and an outer rain band structure that can dump a foot of rain on communities hundreds of miles from the center. When sea surface temperatures are running above normal, that engine has more fuel, it burns hotter, it intensifies faster. And fast intensification, the meteorological term is rapid intensification, defined as a wind speed increase of at least 35 miles per hour in a 24-hour period, is one of the most dangerous and most deadly phenomena in tropical meteorology, because it can take a storm that coastal residents are mentally treating as manageable and turn it into a catastrophe faster than evacuation timelines allow. The ocean. This storm is crossing right now is not just warm. It is anomalously warm, and that distinction matters enormously for what happens next. The atmospheric conditions surrounding this system are almost equally concerning. Wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with altitude, is one of the primary atmospheric factors that limits hurricane intensity. High wind shear tears a tropical system apart, disrupts its circulation, prevents the convective structure from organizing properly. Low wind shear does the opposite. It allows the storm to build vertically, to develop its warm core, to organize its eye wall, and intensify. The wind shear environment that this system is currently moving through and is forecast to move through over the next 72 to 96 hours is running low to very low across the primary threat corridor. Forecasters are not seeing the kind of disruptive atmospheric interference that would naturally limit this storm's development. What they are seeing instead is an environment that is, in almost every measurable way, supportive of intensification. Warm water below, low shear above, sufficient atmospheric moisture through the column, and a storm center that has already demonstrated an organizational trajectory that is tracking ahead of the forecast guidance from 48 hours ago. When a storm tracks ahead of the intensity forecast this early in its life cycle, that is not a reassuring data point. Now let me talk about what the models are showing for track, because track is ultimately what determines which communities end up in the direct path of this system, and which communities get the outer bands and the flooding rains without the catastrophic core impacts. The track guidance has been converging over the last 48 hours, and convergence in the model guidance at this range, 5 to 7 days out, is not always a good sign for the people sitting inside that converging corridor. When models that typically disagree at long range start agreeing with each other, it usually means the large-scale atmospheric pattern controlling the storm's steering is locking in. And right now, the steering pattern is showing a scenario where a dominant high-pressure ridge sitting across the Atlantic essentially acts as a wall on the storm's northern and northeastern flank, preventing the system from recurving out to sea the way that many Atlantic storms do, and instead channeling it on a more westward to west-northwest track that keeps it aimed at the Gulf Coast or the Florida Peninsula for an extended period. The American GFS model, the European ECMWF, and the ensemble guidance from both systems have all been showing variations of this general scenario with increasing consistency over the last several forecast cycles. That consistency is what has the National Hurricane Center taking this threat so seriously at extended range. They are not reacting to one model run. They are reacting to a signal that is showing up persistently, repeatedly, and with narrowing spread across the full suite of available guidance. The specific threat corridor that forecasters are most focused on right now spans from the western Gulf Coast, think southeastern Texas, Louisiana, the Mississippi and Alabama coastlines, across the Florida Panhandle and Peninsula, and up into the southeast and mid-Atlantic if the storm tracks further east than the current consensus suggests. That is an enormous corridor. It covers tens of millions of people. It covers some of the most vulnerable coastline in the entire country. Low-lying barrier islands, shallow Gulf Shelf topography that amplifies storm surge, coastal communities that have been rebuilt after previous storms and are acutely aware of what a direct hit means. And within that corridor, the National Hurricane Center is specifically flagging storm surge as the primary life-threatening hazard, because storm surge is the water that kills, not the wind. Not the rain, though both of those will be catastrophic at this intensity level. It is the surge, the wall of ocean water pushed on shore by the storm circulation, that historically accounts for the majority of direct hurricane fatalities. And in a shallow shelf environment like the Gulf of Mexico, surge values can run dramatically higher than what the wind speed alone might suggest to someone unfamiliar with coastal dynamics. Let me be specific about what surge values look like in a worst-case track scenario for this system at its projected intensity, because I want you to have real numbers in your head rather than abstract warnings. In a Gulf Coast landfall scenario with a major hurricane making landfall near or at peak intensity, surge values of 8 to 12 feet are possible in the most vulnerable coastal zones. In some of the most exposed and low-lying areas, river-mouth communities, bays, estuaries, the inland waterways of Louisiana and Mississippi, surge values could exceed 12 feet. 12 feet of ocean water. That is not flooding. That is not high water. That is a wall of ocean arriving in your neighborhood faster than you can run. And in communities where the land elevation above sea level is measured in single digits, there is nowhere for that water to go except through every structure it encounters. These are not the kinds of numbers that allow for last-minute decisions. These are not the kinds of numbers that permit the mindset of wait and see. We have been through storms before. We will be fine. At 12 feet of storm surge, nothing above ground survives intact. Nothing. And the time window for getting out of those zones, for the people in the most vulnerable coastal communities along this threat corridor, is measured in days, not hours. Here's the part of this story that keeps forecasters awake at night. And I want to say it plainly because it is the most important thing I will tell you in this entire script. Hurricanes at this intensity level do not just threaten the immediate coastline. They threaten the interior. They threaten communities 100 miles inland that have never had to think seriously about hurricane impacts before. The rainfall from a slow-moving major hurricane can be staggering. Totals of 15 to 20 inches are not unusual in the rain bands of a powerful system, and in areas where terrain funnels that rainfall into river valleys and creek systems, the flooding can be catastrophic in communities that have no coastal exposure whatsoever. Harvey in 2017 did not kill people primarily on the coast. It killed people in Houston, in neighborhoods that had flooded before but never like that, in cars on highways that turned into rivers, in homes where people went to sleep thinking the worst was over and woke up to water rising past their windows. A slow-moving major hurricane producing 20 inches of rain over a populated metro area is a civilizational-scale disaster for that metro area, regardless of whether it is 30 miles from the beach or 130. The rainfall threat from this system extends far, far beyond the surge zone, and that matters enormously for how inland communities need to be preparing right now. I also want to talk about the wind threat beyond the immediate landfall zone, because the radius of tropical storm force and hurricane force winds in a major hurricane is large enough to cause devastating damage across a geographic footprint that surprises people who have only seen the track line on a map. The track line, that cone, that line, that dot moving across the graphic, shows you where the center is expected to go. It does not show you the full extent of the storm. A major hurricane with a large wind field can have tropical storm force winds extending 250 to 300 miles from the center. It can have hurricane force winds extending 100 to 150 miles from the center in every direction. A community that sits 200 miles from the track line is not outside this storm. It is inside the outer bands, receiving sustained tropical storm force winds, potentially experiencing hurricane force gusts, almost certainly receiving 4 to 8 inches of rainfall or more from the outer rain bands alone. The map of who is impacted by this storm is not the map of who is inside the cone. The cone is the track uncertainty corridor. The impact corridor is dramatically larger. Now let me tell you what the next 72 hours look like in terms of what we know and what we are still watching. Because I will not pretend that everything about this storm's eventual behavior is settled. There are still meaningful uncertainties, and I want to be honest about them rather than presenting a false precision that collapses the moment the next forecast advisory comes out. The primary uncertainty at this range is intensity. Specifically, whether this system undergoes the rapid intensification episode that the environmental conditions support, or whether some short-term disruption in the atmosphere temporarily interrupts that process. Rapid intensification events are notoriously difficult to forecast at extended range. The models suggest the environment is supportive. The historical analogs suggest it is likely. But meteorology is not certainty, and any honest forecast at 5+ days acknowledges that the intensity could verify lower than the worst-case projections. The track uncertainty at this range is narrower than the intensity uncertainty, which is the more concerning of the two in some ways, because it means that even if the intensity forecast is wrong in a favorable direction, the track forecast carries higher confidence. A weaker storm on this track is still a dangerous, damaging, potentially deadly event for the communities in its path. There is no scenario within the current guidance envelope where this system passes harmlessly. The secondary uncertainty is the timing and behavior of the steering pattern. The ridge that is forecast to block the storm's northward recurvature could weaken earlier than the models project, allowing the storm to turn north sooner and potentially sparing the western Gulf Coast while increasing the threat to Florida and the southeast. It could hold longer than projected, keeping the storm on a more westward track and increasing the threat to Texas and Louisiana. Small differences in how that ridge evolves over the next 48 to 72 hours can produce dramatically different landfall scenarios for communities hundreds of miles apart. This is why the National Hurricane Center maintains a wide cone of uncertainty at day 4 and day 5. Not because they do not have a best guess track, but because honest communication about forecast confidence at extended range requires showing the full range of plausible outcomes to the people who need to make evacuation and preparation decisions. The cone is not a comfort zone. Every community inside that cone needs to be preparing as if the center is coming directly for them, because at this range, any of them could be right. Let me tell you what preparation looks like right now before this storm gets close enough that preparation becomes impossible. If you live on or near the Gulf Coast, the Florida coastline, or anywhere along the southeast Atlantic seaboard, the time to make your decisions is not when the cone narrows. It is not when the hurricane watch is posted. It is not when the storm is 2 days away and every gas station within 200 miles has a line stretching around the block, and every hardware store has been stripped of plywood, generators, and batteries. The time is right now, when the roads are empty and the shelves are stocked and the evacuation routes are clear and you still have every option available to you. Know your evacuation zone. If you do not know your zone, look it up today. Not tomorrow, today. Know your route. Know where you are going if you leave. Know whether the place you are going is itself inside the threat corridor, because evacuating from coastal Louisiana into the Florida Panhandle is not a plan if this storm is tracking for both. Have your important documents gathered. Have your medications filled. Have your go bag ready, have your pets accounted for, and have a plan for them, because last-minute evacuation decisions fall apart when people realize the shelter they plan to use does not take animals. If you live inland, if you are in Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, even further up the eastern seaboard, do not assume this storm's impacts stop at the coast. The rainfall threat follows the track well inland, flash flooding in. Communities far from any beach has killed people in every major hurricane landfall in recent memory. Know your flood risk. Know whether your home sits in a flood-prone area. Know what the rivers and creeks near you look like when they are running at major flood stage. And understand that a slow-moving major hurricane can push those rivers to levels that have not been seen in decades. If there is any chance your neighborhood floods in extreme rainfall events, make arrangements now. Do not wait for a flood watch to be posted. Do not wait for the water to start rising. The people who survive catastrophic flooding events are almost always the people who left early before the roads became part of the river. For your emergency kit, and I'm going to be direct about this because too many people have a mental note about doing this and never actually do it. You need at minimum 7 days of water, 7 days of food that does not require refrigeration or cooking, a battery-powered or hand-crank weather radio that will receive emergency alerts even when cell towers are down, flashlights with extra batteries, a first aid kit, a full tank of gas in every vehicle you own starting right now, cash and small bills because ATMs and card readers stop working when the power goes out, and copies of every critical document you own stored somewhere that is not your home. That list is not aspirational. That is the minimum viable preparation for a major hurricane event. Anything less than that, and you're gambling on outcomes you cannot control. The National Hurricane Center will be issuing advisories every 6 hours as this system continues to develop and organize. Your local emergency management office will be issuing guidance specific to your county, your flood zone, your specific situation. Listen to them, follow them. When they say evacuate a zone, they are not saying it to create inconvenience. They are saying it because the people whose entire professional lives are dedicated to keeping you alive have looked at the surge models and the track guidance and the vulnerability data for your specific community and determined that the risk to human life in that zone is unacceptable if people stay. Evacuation orders are not suggestions. They are the last line of institutional defense between you and a decision that cannot be undone. This storm is coming. The atmosphere is telling us it is coming with a clarity and consistency that makes denial a dangerous luxury. The ocean is warm enough to feed it. The shear is low enough to let it grow. The steering pattern is locked in enough to bring it to shore. The only variables still in play are exactly how strong, exactly where, and exactly when. And those variables are converging with every forecast cycle. The time you have right now, today, in this moment before the cone narrows and the watches are posted and the panic sets in, this time is the most valuable time you will have in this entire storm event. Use it. Prepare now. Make your decisions now. Move now if you need to move, because a large storm is coming, and the gap between being ready and being caught unprepared is a gap that closes faster than you think. And once it closes, it does not open again. Stay with the National Hurricane Center. Stay with your local forecasters. Keep your alerts on. And please, make it through this storm safely.